Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. We're going to cover a great band today in this episode, Traffic. Really one of the great bands coming out of the late 60s into the early 70s. Doesn't get as much attention as a lot of these other bands do, but I think they deserve it. Before we get started, just want to remind people, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Those of you who have, we really appreciate it. Helps us do what we want to do here. Like the videos, hit the bell for notification, all that good stuff. Okay, Traffic. So a little bit of background here. Steve Winwood. Obviously Traffic is mostly associated with Steve Winwood. But, we got to talk about these other guys who really made great contributions. But yeah, so Steve Winwood, was already, as a teenager, he was making waves as this incredibly soulful singer, already an impressive multi-instrumentalist. And, so he kind of made his name in the Spencer Davis group, right? And once he left the Spencer Davis group, he was looking to kind of establish his own band to really make his mark. And a lot of people were really interested to see what he was going to do because he was already seen as sort of this boy genius, right? So he hooks up with Dave Mason and Jim Capaldi and Chris Wood, right? So Winwood vocals, keyboards and guitar, Mason guitar and vocals, Capaldi vocals and drums, and Chris Wood on various woodwinds, mainly flute and some saxophones and stuff like that. And they kind of did this. Some great bands do sometimes to really kind of get this tight cohesion. They rented this house out in the English countryside and lived together, kind of communally, wrote songs. That's kind of where their first record really came together. But the tension was there from the beginning. Dave Mason is sort of in and out of the band. He's on their first two records and somewhat on the third, and that's it. And they break up briefly after that. Winwood, of course, joins up with Clapton and Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, Rick Gretsch for one of the very first supergroups, Blind Faith, for this one record, which has some amazing material on it and then so-so material on it. And then basically reforms Traffic. It becomes a lot more jazzier, kind of goes more in that direction for a few more records. And really, they're done by the early 70s. They have a one-off reunion in the 90s, and then that's it. So, a little bit of history there. Let's get into the rankings. We got 8 studio albums to talk about, so we're going to rank them and talk about them. And then at the end, we can talk about some live records and some compilations. All right? So at number 8, let's just get this out of the way right now. This would be everyone's number 8, I assume, is the one-off reunion, 1994's Far From Home. I just have this on CD. I don't know. Was this ever put out on vinyl? I don't know, but Far From Home. It's just Winwood and Capaldi, right? Because Chris Wood is deceased by this time, I believe, already, and they're still not getting along with Dave Mason, so he wasn't going to be involved. So it's basically just Winwood and Capaldi. And honestly, this basically sounds like a Steve Winwood solo album from the 90s, which is not a great thing. So I'm going to do a Winwood video later, and he has some wonderful things. But the 90s weren't a great period for him. And this basically sounds like it, just kind of the synthesizers, adult contemporary, maybe a little more stretching out on, a little more jamming, but it's not much. Just doesn't sound like Traffic, but easy to dismiss. All right, the rest of them are from their prime period here. So coming in at number 7, I have 1973's Shootout at the Fantasy Factory. There they are. Now this is sort of a companion piece to the previous record, which you'll see a bit higher on this list, Low Spark of High Heel Boys. Really kind of a sequel. I mean, down to the very interesting, you know, shape of the album with these little corners cut off here, and kind of the similar artwork, at least, or the feel of the artwork, and similar sound. I mean, the only difference here, though, is they don't have the songs here. I don't think they don't have the material, but they do try and kind of like with Low Spark, and then this one and the final one sort of stretch out in more of sort of a jazz rock, a little maybe a little more fusiony direction. But they just don't have the songs. There are two killer songs on here. It's the title track, which rocks, and then sometimes I feel so uninspired, which I love. Love that song. It's just ironically, it has always inspired me when I feel uninspired, and really memorable, I think, for Steve Winwood's fantastic guitar solo. Uh, you know, Winwood doesn't get enough credit for just a killer guitar player. It really is. Unfortunately, that's it. All the rest of the songs on here, at least in my view, are totally forgettable. All right. Coming in at number 6, we have Last Exit, which at the time was thought to be, it's the third record, at the time thought to be their final record because they did sort of break up briefly after this. And this basically was put together by the record company. Uh, the band had nothing to do with this. They had already split after the second record, really, and so they had some songs in the vault. So this is half live, half studio. So the first side is just sort of leftover studio tracks, and then the second side is live. The studio side actually I think is pretty solid. It's pretty good. Um, got Shanghai Noodle Factory, uh, Medicated Goo. you know, I mean, actually, kind of a looser direction sounds good. The problem is the live side. There's only two tracks on there: "Feeling Good" and "Blind Man," both covers. The sound quality is pretty bad. Sounds kind of bootleggy actually, and not that inspired. So I think the second side, the live side, really drags it down a little bit. But the studio side of those leftovers is a bit strong, I think. All right, number 5. Number 5 is a real, I think, lost gem. It's the sleeper in this discography, and it's their final, or at least if you don't count the '90s reunion, the final record, which came out in 1974, "When the Eagle Flies." It's really nice listen. It still has that sort of jazzy, kind of opened up feel. Some longer songs here, like "Walking in the Wind" is nice, almost 7 minutes. The 11-minute "Dream Gerard" is beautiful. It's got that great groove to it. Yeah, it's just a real. I don't know. I think it goes out pretty strong. This record didn't do all that well, but it's a nice listen, maybe a nice rediscovery for some people. And again, kind of has that sort of moodier, jazzier feel to it. I like it a lot. All right, number 4 is actually a very popular record with a lot of fans. A lot of people really like this record. Talking about 1970s, John Barleycorn Must Die, which was sort of the first reunion, right? They get together. Um, Dave Mason's out, and so it's just the trio. Now, this started as a Steve Winwood solo album. He was, Traffic was done, and so he was putting together what was going to be his first solo album, and then he brings in uh, Capaldi and Wood, and really basically becomes, sort of Traffic Mach 2, right? Opens with the instrumental "Glad" and then "Freedom Rider," which I've never really liked all that much. I mean, I think it's kind of cool that they're trying to do this great sort of more kind of jazzy jam. But honestly, to me, "Glad" doesn't really go anywhere musically. it just sort of repeats that motif too much. And when they do start the solo, I don't think it really goes very far. Winwood is a great soloist, but depending on Chris Wood, I didn't think he was kind of up to the same level as Winwood, and Chris Wood's really kind of solos on the saxophone on that a lot. And then you got Freedom Rider. Now, Empty Pages is one of Winwood's great songs. God, what a groove on that! John Barleycorn is a nice sort of English folk acoustic song, which is great. And the other two songs are good, but not too memorable. Stranger to Himself and Every Mother's Son. So this is great, and it really sort of announced their new direction, which is nice. Okay, coming in at number 3, I do have their debut. Now, this has kind of a confusing story to it because this is one of those records where the UK versus US versions are very different. Um, in the UK, I have that on CD. It was released as Mr. Fantasy. In the US, it was released as Heaven is in Your Mind, but then in later reissue, it's changed to Mr. Fantasy with this cover. Now, this cover is on whether it's called Heaven is Your Mind or Mr. Fantasy. So, this is the US version with this cover versus the UK with this cover. I kind of like the UK cover better. And then, if you're interested in Canada, it was released as The Reaping. I don't have that one. So, really kind of a near masterpiece, not quite masterpiece, but a near masterpiece of sort of, folk psychedelia. It came out in 1967. And there's a couple differences, songs that are here that aren't on here, but really it's the track order is changed around pretty dramatically. And because this was released in the UK first, when they were still kind of considered, this quartet. And so Dave Mason's songs and Winwood's songs were sort of equally represented here. Before, it was released in the US a little bit later. And notice, you got all 4 guys here on this cover. You only got 3 here because by the time it was released in the US, Mason was already out. Okay. Now he's going to come back, but he was already out here. There's the 3 of them there. And so they kind of want to de-emphasize Dave Mason's material. So it's sort of reordered. A couple of Mason's tunes are dropped for a couple more Winwood tunes. I guess I prefer the US version a little bit. This is a little more kind of pastoral, psychedelic. This is a little more grounded, I think. But, just some fantastic songs on here. Paper Sun, Dealer, Colored Rain, Hole in My Shoe, No Face, No Name, No Number, Heaven is in Your Mind. Yeah, really, that whole first side is awesome all the way through. The second side, to me, you got a few more throwaways here, but Smiling Phases is good. And you've got to talk about Dear Mr. Fantasy. To me, one of the great songs of the 60s. Again, Steve Winwood's guitar playing is just so underrated and awesome. Dear Mr. Fantasy is to me one of the great kind of psychedelic songs. It's one of the great songs, and it's kind of a case where that song just stands so tall it almost overshadows the rest, and it's the second to last track on the second side. It's also, where is it here? It's the 5th track on the UK. It's a little bit better. I guess that would probably close. Like I said, I just have this on CD, but I imagine that would close the first side. They bury it second to last. Isn't that like where you put the worst tracks on an album? Is like second to last track on the second side. It's just buried on here. So I really think that should be more up front, but it's here. It's just one of the great, great songs. All right. Number 2. I have number 2. Their second record. Dave Mason's back, so you got the foursome there on the cover, entitled just Traffic from 1968. This is awesome because this really shows I enjoy the contrast between Winwood and Mason. Like Dave Mason brings kind of more straightforward, really good kind of pop rock songs. Winwood songs are a little more kind of moody, a little jazzier. And it's such a great contrast between those two. And it's like this tug of war between between them, like what this band should be. And that's what makes this record so great. And they both bring great songs. Dave Mason opens it with "You Can All Join In," and "Don't Be Sad," which is a beautiful song. "Feeling All Right," probably his most famous composition. Of course, was a huge hit for Joe Cocker later, right? What else? "Vagabond Virgin" from Mason, "Crying to Be Heard." And then Winwood brings "Pearly Queen," which has some great jamming on it. "Who Knows What Tomorrow May Bring." 40,000 Headmen, which is one of Winwood's great songs. I mean, it's so moody and just awesome. Yeah, and then what else is on there? No Time to Live, Means to an End. So, I mean, I love the kind of, and I wish they had been able to keep it together longer because I would have liked to had a few more records to see what Winwood and Mason, could have done together and kind of, hope, maybe develop together a little bit more, but was not to be. My number one Traffic record is "Low Spark of High Heeled Boys," 1971. This, I think, is their masterpiece. I think this is their only real 5-star record. Really, a lot of jazz influence on here. It's almost kind of fusiony, but from the rock perspective. Um, the title track, "Low Spark of High Heeled Boys," all 12 minutes of it is their crowning achievement. Probably Steve Winwood's crowning achievement in any group. Uh, there they are. And that slow fade in, that awesome piano solo, and it's just there's so much space. I mean, just uses just space and just jazzy elements are so good. And again, with Winwood's sort of more expansive jazzy songs, and it's Capaldi who comes in and kind of brings a couple of rockers in here to balance it out. Your "Light Up or Leave Me Alone" and "Rock and Roll Stew," right, are kind of some more straight ahead rockers from Jim Capaldi. Great singing on that too from Capaldi. It's cool. So Capaldi and Winwood have this nice contrast on here. And this love this record. Brilliant, brilliant. Well, all right, guys. So let's briefly talk comps and live. Let's talk about live albums. This is the earliest live album here. This is "Welcome to the Canteen," and kind of notorious for some bad sound. Although I don't know, I've gotten kind of used to it. I like it because it does feature some tunes. I mean, I think this is the third time Dave Mason comes back very briefly, for this, and that's it. Um, yeah, and I think it. I don't know. I think it benefits from that, because you got "Sad and Deep as You" and "Shouldn't Have Took More Than You Gave," two great Dave Mason songs that don't appear on the other Traffic albums that are here. Real nice acoustic type stuff. 40,000 Headmen is sort of expanded into a nice jam. Love that. "Medicated Goo" is good. The second side, you got "Dear Mr. Fantasy." It's all right. And then "Give Me Some Lovin'," which is a throwback, right? That was a big hit for Winwood when he was with Spencer Davis Group. That one goes on a little too long. It's almost 9 minutes. So I don't know. So this is one that has kind of a bad reputation. I've had it forever. I can't even remember when I bought this. I didn't like it for a long time, but it's grown on me finally, where I do kind of enjoy it somewhat. Now, well, I'll just mention this because I want to finish with my favorite live album of theirs, but I'll just mention in that '90s reunion there was a live album from that tour. It was put out a little bit later. I don't have it. I've heard it. Was it Great Traffic Jam or The Last Traffic Jam or Traffic Jam. I don't know. There it is. It's, whatever. It's kind of forgettable to me. I think the real gem here, though, and the other 5-star album in this discography is this, On the Road. It's a live album. Well, of course it's live. We're talking about live albums. And it's a case where less is more. Because I have the CD version of this and it's expanded, but all the additional stuff on the expanded CD, I think, take away. There's a kind of a mind-numbing 20-minute Glad Freedom Rider, on the expanded CD version. But you get the vinyl. It's one record. There's 4 songs, and they're all just awesome. It's 2 songs from Low Spark of High Yield Boys, and the 2 good songs from Shootout, Fantasy Factory. So it's like that era, that more jazzy experimental stuff. There's a 15-minute just killer version of Low Spark of High Heeled Boys, and then a 10-minute just blazing guitar solo again from Winwood on Sometimes I Feel So Uninspired. A great version of Shootout at the Fantasy Factory, and then Light Up or Leave Me Alone, like a 10-minute jam on that, that Capaldi song. All 4 of them. It's just this is just, I think this is a killer record, and it's not talked about a whole lot either. So to me, this is a 5-star record. I love this record. So I would recommend On the Road. Now, as far as compilations, real quick. Now I have this one. This is the only one I have on vinyl, Heavy Traffic. And I mean, it's good. It really focuses on that first era. There's one song from John Barleycorn, Empty Pages. Then every other song on here is earlier, before that. So there's none of that Low Spark era on there on this. But it's a good summary of like that first era. I would really recommend it. I used to have this on CD, and I don't anymore. It's a double disc, but it's perfect. The editor can put it up here. It's called Smiling Phases. If you can find it, double disc. That is kind of a perfect Traffic comp. So good, so good. Doesn't have any. I don't think I'm trying to remember. It doesn't have any live stuff on there, but really good. Sampling of their studio material. So I'd recommend that. Well, all right, guys. In the comments, tell me, what do you guys, how do you feel about Traffic? What are your favorite Traffic albums? Did I get the ranking wrong, right? What do you say? Well, anyway, hope you enjoyed that, guys, and we'll see you next time.